Chieftronic or Chieftec just sent over their Nova set of 120mm fans and they got an RGB ring. And then they got another RGB ring going around the first RGB ring to be sure that everybody knows that there are rings. And then there is even more RGB going on in the center. Oh, and then there are another 2 rings on the backside, because why the hell not at this point? Don't think all of them are independent. Each fan got 32 individual LEDs, 16 in the central fan hub, and another 16 going around the fan where all of the rings are essentially sharing the same LED. Slightly disappointing, I know, but it's how it is. Judging by the quality of the box, it does look pretty promising. Nicely designed, thick carton, and yeah, somebody thought for more than a minute about this. But you should never judge a book by its cover. On the inside, we'll find 3 of these NF1225 RGB 120mm fans, a fan speed/RGB controller including a remote, and a whole bunch of screws. Although I'm not much into external controllers, I really am not, but I can say that Chieftronic did a fine job with this one. We got power by SATA, 5 PWM and 6 3-pin ARGB headers on each side, so you can connect even more if you want to. And although the controller can be used with the included remote, it will immediately go into motherboard control using the PWM and 3-pin ARGB connectors meant to go into your motherboard. And doing that by default is not always the case, requiring you to use the remote to set it up, which sucks, but here it is by default, so that's okay. That being said, the effects are really not that good. Pressing the little gear icon will allow the remote to do basically anything because it will jump into controller mode. But from there we got like 20 modes, none of which come close to the usual rainbow fairy dust that we know from basically everywhere. And Auto will just loop through all of them and will give you an occasional seizure when all of the lights starts flashing for no reason. But enough on that controller, let's get to the fans. These PWM and 3-pin ARGB controlled little things are capable of spinning up to 1600 RPM whilst blowing 68 CFM at 2.2mm of H2O. So they seem to be the kind of a mix between a case and almost a radiator fan. It's a mix. Something that the 9 short but heavily bent wing design also suggests. On the RGB side of things, it's not particularly good. Sure, we got an unnatural amount of milky see-through acrylic. The problem, however, is I can see the LEDs. It's not so obvious when the whole thing is shining in a single color, but once the moving light effects start, I can count them. And I don't want to be able to count them. So either it's just not enough LEDs, which was probably the case, or the milky effect on the plastic is just not strong enough. They could have made it stronger, but then the light wouldn't shine so much through, so use more LEDs. But hey, at least they are bright, with an occasional seizure. Auto gives me seizures. But what about performance? In the end, that's the single most important category and the only one that really matters. In order to test that, we got 2 sets of scenarios today. A really raw just case scenario and a radiator test. However, and at this point a huge apology from my side, you can't know anything about the new case fan benchmark machine in form of this wooden box because not a single episode about the building process has been released yet. My scheduling skills are off the charts. And I don't want to go into too much detail to not spill like the whole series, but to make it short, it's a wooden box with 2 interchangeable sides, which we have replacement parts for every fan size in existence. You know, because comparing 120 and 140mm fans makes a lot of sense given that there are cases that give you both options. However, with this thing we can go up to the extreme with sizes above 200mm because there might be 200mm fans out there which are beaten by 120s, or not. On the inside we got a Nokia P1 passive cooler and a about 65 watts pushing 3600X with everything locked down. The point about all of this is that the Nokia P1's fins are so spaced out that the setup completely ignores most of the static pressure that a fan would provide. Not completely, but for the most part. Like a case fan, essentially. Then we got an intake fan on one side and an exhaust fan on the other. So in practice, it's essentially a sealed off box where we measure how well a given fan can recycle the air that's within the box by measuring how well the passive cooler in between all of that can keep up with the temperature. I know, sounds like a very complicated way to test things, but that way we can completely ignore the performance of a CPU cooler and we can benchmark every single fan size against every other fan size, something that will make sense later on given that there are cases that support from 120 up to 200mm fans. So that was kind of my goal here. And there will be a huge explanation video coming, just not yet. First I want to finish benchmarking every fan and I want to release the whole series where we build this thing. But okay, let's go to the first results created with this machine. It doesn't look good, and that's an understatement. It's really freaking awful. Although I have tried to gather some reference values to help you orient how well the Chieftronic Nova fans perform, they look awful, even when compared against things like a 1200 RPM quick spinning Nokia NFS12B. And yes, the new benchmark machine is supposed to ignore static pressure as far as possible and favor airflow focused fans, but these are supposed to push 68 CFM, which is 10 more on paper than the Nokia NFS12B. So I have no clue how companies come up with these numbers. And this is not a fan-specific unit issue. I tested every fan, or every setup 3 times, and I rotated the intake and exhaust fan with the 3 individual fans that I got to get these numbers. On every try, they were giving me 50 degrees C plus numbers. Absolutely horrendous considering what a Montech AX120 can push. And because I still couldn't trust myself, I moved the whole machine into this room. I benchmarked it in another room. I moved the whole thing here onto the table just in case the ambient makes an issue. No, it is incredible. These do not even come close to the slowest spinning Nokia fan. After letting the fan spin slower and slower, we discovered that they perform this bad all across the board. One point that they did kinda get is noise. For 1600 RPM fans, they are not loud at all. On the flip side, however, it's exactly the same noise level as a Nokia NFS12A, just offset in temperature by a lot. So far, we know that these are not the best case fans, and maybe that's okay, maybe they are amazing radiator fans. So we slapped them onto the 80mm thick radiator of our radiator fan benchmark machine, the Octopus. And they suck. But hey, they are not as bad this time. No, at 16.1 degrees C above ambient for the circulating water, they beat the clearly case fan oriented iSpec thermal iScale silent, and they beat the reverse spinning Montech RX120s. Congratulations, you've beaten a fan that was put together the wrong way. Slowly lowering the fan speed on the radiator setup revealed that although it's not as bad as last time, it's still the lowest possible score we have seen. Usually with fans, they are either very good for cases or very good for rads. They might not be the best at either one of them, but a fan should at least aim for something or one of the categories, or both. But for Chieftronic Nova, they are just good at neither. They really suck as case fans, and they did not stand out in any way, shape or form as a radiator fan. The RGB implementation is not really 2023 worthy, at least not for me. I can count LEDs, I don't want to be counting LEDs. And although the controller looks and feels nice, it kinda lacks the single most important color scheme, and it's a seizure generator. The only thing I can give Chieftronic credit for is quality. Yes, having them in my hands, they do look kinda nice. Yeah, I know the design, the double ring thing is not new, but they do feel nicer than like the usual white label fan. And also the controller, everything does feel to a degree nicer than I would have expected. But still, even if they were the nicest feeling fans in the world and they would fill me with joy every time I ran my finger in between the fan blades, they still need to perform somewhere, and these just didn't. And it really makes me question where companies get their CFM and static pressure numbers from, but that's just how it is. Price-wise, it's it's okay. At about 40 euros here where I am, they come down to slightly above 10 euros per fan, which is okay, but they still need to perform. To end this, if it wasn't obvious until now, don't go for these. In a general sense, something went wrong here, and they are just not as good as they should have been based on the technical data sheet. Anyway, I think this should be all for Chieftronic and their Nova RGB fan set, and even if the review turned out quite negatively, still a big thank you for sending them over. On a side note, we also have a Discord server, so if you want to join, the link is down below. And of course, we still have channel memberships, so if you are looking for a good way to sell your soul for an RG poop emoji, that's a pretty good way to go. Additionally, you can rest assured that the income will not only keep the channel afloat, but will also serve to find out how companies generate these CFM and static pressure numbers. Based on past experience, I guess they just used like a Google random number generator, but I would like to hire a private investigator just to know for sure. Anyway, thank you for watching, but if you want to continue, have a look at our take on the Spec Thermal iScale Extra. Whoa, long name, but they are extra fast, extra strong and extra ugly. But it's ugly by choice. Hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.